To understand the gold standard as a global financial anchor is to enter an era when money deliberately chained itself to something heavy, scarce, and stubbornly indifferent to human desire, because gold was never chosen for its convenience, but for its resistance. In a world repeatedly scarred by debasement defaults and broken promises, gold came to represent an attempt to discipline both markets and states, to impose an external constraint on political ambition and monetary temptation. The gold standard was not merely a technical arrangement for settling balances. It was a moral statement about restraint, credibility, and the belief that trust in money had to be earned through limitation rather than flexibility. Gold had functioned as money for millennia, but the gold standard as a coherent global system emerged only in the 19th century, alongside industrialization empire and the rapid expansion of international trade. Britain, sitting at the center of global commerce, formalized gold convertibility in the early 1800s, effectively declaring that the pound was not just a national currency, but a promise redeemable in a universally desired asset. This decision transformed London into the heart of global finance, because once money could be exchanged for gold at a fixed rate, trust traveled effortlessly across borders. Merchants, investors, and governments no longer needed to know each other personally. They needed only to believe in convertibility. What made the gold standard so powerful was not gold itself, but the discipline it imposed. Governments could not expand the money supply freely without risking gold outflows, and persistent trade deficits translated into real painful adjustments as gold drained from the country, forcing contraction, falling prices, and political discomfort. In theory, this mechanism created automatic balance, rewarding surplus nations and punishing deficit ones without the need for negotiation or coercion. In practice, it created a harsh but predictable environment, one that favored creditors, exporters, and financial centers, while placing the burden of adjustment squarely on workers and debtors. By the late 19th century, the gold standard had become the backbone of globalization's first great age. Capital flowed freely across borders, exchange rates were stable, and long-term investment flourished because future values felt secure. Railways were financed empires, administered, and trade expanded under the assumption that gold convertibility would hold. For investors, this was an era of confidence. For states, it was an era of constraint. Monetary sovereignty was voluntarily surrendered in exchange for credibility, and political leaders understood that violating gold commitments carried reputational costs that could echo for decades. Yet, embedded within this apparent stability was a profound asymmetry. The gold standard functioned best when economies were willing to endure deflation, wage cuts, and unemployment to defend convertibility, and this willingness was unevenly distributed. Financial elites and creditor nations praised gold's discipline, while workers and peripheral economies experienced it as a rigid cage that turned downturns into prolonged suffering. Gold did not adapt to economic reality. Economies were forced to adapt to gold, and this rigidity would become increasingly problematic as democratic politics expanded and societies grew less tolerant of automatic hardship imposed in the name of abstract credibility. The true test of the gold standard came not in calm, but in crisis. Wars strained its limits immediately because mass mobilization demanded spending far beyond what gold reserves could support. Governments suspended convertibility, printed money, and borrowed heavily, discovering in the process that survival mattered more than orthodoxy. Each suspension weakened the myth of permanence, and although attempts were made to restore the system after conflicts ended, the psychological damage lingered. Once people had seen that gold promises could be broken, belief never fully recovered. The interwar period exposed the gold standard's fatal flaw with brutal clarity. Determined to return to pre-war stability, governments attempted to reimpose gold convertibility at unrealistic exchange rates, prioritizing reputation over economic reality. The result was deflation, unemployment, and social unrest on a massive scale. Instead of acting as an anchor, gold became a transmission mechanism for crisis, spreading deflation across borders and locking economies into contraction. When the Great Depression hit, countries that abandoned gold earlier recovered faster, while those that clung to it longest suffered deepest, revealing that what had once been a source of trust had become an obstacle to adaptation. The collapse of the gold standard was not a technical failure, it was a political one. Gold demanded sacrifices that modern societies were no longer willing to make, and democratic governments chose employment and stability over metallic purity. After World War II, a modified system emerged with currencies pegged indirectly to gold through the US dollar, but even this compromise could not survive indefinitely. By 1971, the final link between money and gold was severed, ending an era in which the value of money was anchored to a physical substance rather than collective belief. Seen in historical perspective, the gold standard was never just about gold. It was about trust, outsourced to nature, an attempt to escape the moral hazards of human discretion by tying money to something beyond politics. Its rise reflected a world that valued predictability over flexibility. Its fall reflected a world that demanded responsiveness over rigidity. The debate it embodies has never disappeared, because every monetary system must choose where discipline comes from external constraint or internal governance, and gold represented the most extreme form of the former. To call the gold standard a global financial anchor is therefore accurate but incomplete, because anchors both stabilize and restrict. They prevent drift, but they also limit movement, and in calm waters, they inspire confidence, while in storms, they can pull ships under. The gold standard stabilized expectations in an age of expanding trade, but it proved dangerously inflexible in an age of mass politics and systemic shocks. And it is precisely at this point where the virtues of constraint collide with the necessity of adaptability that the deeper legacy of gold begins to matter for modern debates about monetary credibility, inflation, and trust. Because although gold no longer defines money, the longing for an anchor has never fully disappeared and continues to shape how societies argue about what money should be and who should be trusted to control it, when fear of excess returns and the memory of discipline feels seductive once again. And it is at that unresolved tension that the next movement of this story must begin. Begin because once the gold standard ceased to function as an unquestioned anchor, the world did not move into a post-discipline era so much as into a different kind of discipline, one that shifted constraint from metal to institutions and from automatic rules to human judgment. The collapse of gold did not free money from limits. It forced societies to confront openly and uncomfortably the question gold had long suppressed: who decides how much money is enough, and on what authority? This transition marked one of the most consequential turning points in financial history, because it replaced an external anchor with an internal one, and in doing so, transferred responsibility from nature to governance. In the immediate aftermath of gold's abandonment, monetary systems did not become reckless overnight. Instead, they entered a prolonged period of experimentation, searching for credibility without convertibility. Bretton Woods represented a compromise between rigidity and flexibility, anchoring currencies to the US dollar, while anchoring the dollar to gold, a layered structure designed to preserve stability without forcing every country into deflationary adjustment. For a generation, this system worked tolerably well, supported by post-war Reconstruction demographic growth and American economic dominance. but its success depended on restraint by the anchor nation itself, and when U.S. deficits mounted and global dollar claims exceeded available gold, the contradiction became impossible to ignore. The final break in 1971 did not end discipline, it ended denial. What followed was the age of fiat money, often misunderstood as money without rules. In reality, fiat systems simply relocate discipline from physical scarcity to institutional credibility. Central banks replaced gold as anchors promising price stability through policy rather than convertibility, and markets learned to evaluate currencies not by their metallic backing, but by the quality of governance, fiscal coherence, and political stability behind them. Inflation in the 1970s exposed the cost of mismanaging this responsibility, but the subsequent tightening demonstrated that discipline could be restored without gold, albeit through painful trade-offs imposed deliberately rather than automatically. Seen in this light, the gold standard's legacy is not nostalgia, but tension. It continues to haunt monetary debates because it represents a world where limits were visible, impersonal, and unforgiving qualities that feel reassuring whenever trust in institutions erodes. Calls for a return to gold or for new anchors, like fixed rules or algorithmic money, are rarely about metal. They are about fear of discretion and the belief that human judgment cannot be trusted with power over money. History suggests otherwise, not that discretion is safe, but that constraint must evolve with society's tolerance for pain, inequality, and political legitimacy. The deepest lesson of the gold standard is therefore not that money should be rigid, but that credibility requires sacrifice. Under gold, the sacrifice was deflation and unemployment. Under fiat, it is transparency, accountability, and the willingness to impose discipline even when it is politically costly. Neither system offers a free lunch, and each fails when societies attempt to enjoy stability without paying its price. Gold failed when nations refused its pain. Fiat fails when institutions refuse responsibility. From a long historical perspective, the gold standard appears less as a golden age than as a mirror reflecting a world that prioritized external discipline over democratic choice. Its rise coincided with limited suffrage and creditor dominance, its fall with mass politics and social insurance. This does not make one era wiser than the other, but it clarifies why gold could not survive unchanged. Monetary systems are social technologies, and when the society they serve changes, their design must change with it or break under strain. The global financial anchor then was never gold alone. It was belief in constraint. When that belief was outsourced to metal, it produced stability at the cost of flexibility. When it was brought back into institutions, it produced adaptability at the cost of constant vigilance. The struggle between these models has never ended because it reflects a permanent human dilemma: how to balance freedom with discipline in a system where money connects present desire to future obligation. If this exploration of the gold standard has sharpened how you think about monetary credibility and constraint, then it has done what history does best, not offering answers, but clarifying trade-offs. If you want to continue tracing how financial systems search for anchors, after gold, subscribe to the channel and stay with these stories, and leave a comment sharing whether you believe modern money needs stronger rules or better institutions. Because the debate gold began did not end with its collapse. It simply moved inside us where decisions about trust, restraint, and responsibility are harder to escape and impossible to outsource.